So welcome back to another cloudDNA Essential Guide, and this time we're focusing on Citrix NetScaler 10.1. My name is Al Taylor. I'm one of the co-founders at cloudDNA, and as usual, I'd love to hear your feedback, or if you've got any comments or questions about some of the topics raised today. It'd be great to hear from you. al@clouddna.co is my email address. You can follow the latest news from us at cloudDNA on our Twitter handle @cloudDNA, or have a look at my blog, netscalertaylor.com, where some of you may have already seen a little bit of a write-up on the 10.1 release a couple of weeks ago now. So 10.1, we're super excited about this. 200 plus new features in there, and there's lots and lots to learn, and we're still learning along the way now. Let's have a little dig into the main story behind it, though, and it comes down to these three component parts. Citrix are increasing the visibility, they're looking into the mobility and the cloud networking piece as well. Those are the main feature areas. Not exclusively these things, but certainly these are where the bulk of the actions are being fed at the moment. So let's crack straight into this. And with visibility, it comes down to a simple process. You can't manage things that you can't measure. So we've spoken previously about NetScaler Insight Center on previous essential guides, and this really comes down to the ability to take the information that NetScaler's accruing and to bring it into a method that we humans can understand. Now, the screenshot shows you NetScaler Insight Center 1.0. And this was the first example, which was kind of a beta, and we've been playing around with that for a little while. But NetScaler 10.1 now allows us to bring that level of granularity, that level of complexity, right the way down. So NetScaler HDX Insight, which is a component part of Insight Center, it allows us to get really deep level inspection of Zen app and Zen desktop traffic, and the VDI in a box for that matter. The session performance from the server to the endpoint and back again. Now, if you're responsible for the delivery of Zen app and Zen desktop sessions and so on, then HDX Insight is a really, really valuable tool as we move forward. And it's worth having a look at if you haven't done so already. Runs on a separate appliance as a virtual server and can collect records from multiple NetScalers across your environment. Now, if NetScaler is not being used to support your Zen app and Zen desktop users, then Web Insight is perhaps the way to look forward. A complete application visibility solution from the client side through to the server side and back again. What are my top URLs? Which are my lazy servers that are causing us performance bottlenecks? And are we hitting the SLAs that we've said we're going to hit for our users? Well, Web Insight brings that Insight Center component right up to date and gives us the ability to be able to understand exactly what's happening on the infrastructure. And again, if we can see what's happening there, as we've proved today already, then it makes it very clear what we need to do, whether that's a remediation to solve problems on the fly, or whether that's to plan and build capacity in, or if we're getting really clever, to be able to add some value into those business intelligence conversations elsewhere in our organizations. We know what our users are looking at on our website without having to go into agents and taps and tools and so on. Then perhaps we can start to allow the marketing guys to see where to focus their efforts and attentions. And as a result of that, we then become part of greater things. Insight Center isn't brand new, but these additional components of Web Insight and HDX Insight are really something to do with 10.1, and that's why we highlight them today. Okay, so now we can see what's going on, all of us. That's great. So mobility then starts to become the next thing. And of course, mobility is everywhere. Everybody has iPads. Everybody has their Android devices. They've got their tablet devices to their mobile devices. It's becoming greater every day. And even to the point now where motor cars or automobiles, if you're joining us from the other side of the pond, good morning to you, these things even have their own web browsers built in many instances. There's obvious problems when we're starting to look at supporting mobile devices, and this is why Citrix have really got a big push on this at the moment. Now, clearly, if these are mobile devices that are supporting the latest efforts from Zen Mobile, the Citrix technologies, then that's interesting. And similarly, if they're going to be supporting our web infrastructures and we're looking to deliver content out to mobile users for our services, there's some challenges that are involved in there. And that's really about persistence and performance. To make sure that the user can access the services is the first key. But the performance side of things is clearly going to be an issue as well, particularly here in the UK, where we're still struggling away with 3G networks that are really clunky and slow and heavily congested at the best of times. it starts to get a little bit tricky trying to hit those SLAs. Now, we've seen that Insight Center allows us to measure exactly what those performance metrics are, but we need to find ways of polishing these things up. And mobile users by default, well, they're mobile. I mean, here comes one now. They move around the networks and they move between antennas and they move between 3G and 4G and Wi-Fi networks and so on. So trying to keep the persistence up with these guys is really starting to get quite tricky. Now, to some instance, these conversations are geared more towards the telcos and those organizations that do those back end infrastructures. But the relevance is there to show you also how Citrix are aware of this and the type of technologies that they're baking into the NetScaler platform to ensure that these users get the sort of service that they expect. Okay, so let's look at this persistence piece. So multipath TCP is a new feature that comes into 10.1, and this detects the new paths that those roaming users cross over, moving between 3G networks, moving across 4G networks, and moving around and perhaps coming into a building and hitting Wi-Fi. Multipath TCP recognizes as that user is going to pick up those new networks, and it selects which is the best path around congestion or packet loss or whatever those other metrics may be. Now, again, we're not going to go into every single component part today. We don't have time to do that. But as an idea, it gives you an understanding of how Citrix are taking control of these problems right now, ready for this bulk of influx of additional devices that are coming online almost daily. And to a certain extent, many of the people watching today, thanks for your time, you'll have a couple of devices perhaps that can access these mobile networks in and around you right now. And that's only going to grow. Even my mother now expects to be able to get on the web from her mobile device. And as more and more people come in there, it gets more and more challenging to hit those SLAs. So, from a persistence perspective, that's challenging enough. But performance is something else altogether. I've always struggled with this. We live in the southeast of the UK, and as a result of that, traveling into London on a train and as such, it gets to the point where really I'd probably not bother and I'll wait until I get off at the other end because the networks are really, really heavily saturated. And as a result, it takes ages to download those individual bits that make up a web screen of a newspaper and so on. So we're finding a way to try and speed this up, and it's known as the Speedy Protocol. It's a Google-backed protocol, which has been floating around for a year or so now. Again, if you're not familiar with HTTP, don't worry too much, but that's the kind of stuff that comes out of our web servers and generally would be passed out into the great unknown, the great wide world. The issue there, though, is if I have to put Speedy in that back end infrastructure, then I have to make a load of changes to the code in my server estate and to the applications in there, then that's going to start to get really challenging to roll that out. So crucially, the NetScaler acts as a Speedy gateway. In other words, I can put my traditional HTTP in the back. NetScaler can assess if the endpoint supports the Speedy protocol, and if it does, then we can apply those metrics. And effectively, Speedy allows us to put prioritization, compression, and multiplexing into the protocol to reduce the amount of data that's being sent to the endpoint and to ultimately speed up the service and ensure that the user gets that content as quickly as possible. Now, it's not for everyone at the moment. Currently, Internet Explorer is a little bit behind. We're told it may come into IE 11. And personally, I'm using Safari at the moment, and it's not in there either. But for Chrome, for Firefox, and for Opera, you guys have already got Speedy, and you'll see that. And you'll see in certain websites and certain application delivery elements, you'll see that Speedy is currently operating, and it's pretty good. It's been clunky, and it's getting there, but it's pretty good now. And so we're seeing that to start to be baked into those mobile devices as well. But crucially, what we're getting at is if you can reduce the amount of content and the amount of traffic that's been passed to the endpoint by default, if there's less to get there, then it gets there quicker. So the Speedy Gateway is a real key feature. And as we look to the future, I think you'll see that this will be adopted by many, many more organizations. And to make life easy, to be able to do it as a gateway without that big effort on the back end infrastructure, this could be quite an interesting year or so as this migration happens. Okay, so there's lots of features within mobility, but those are probably the primary two to keep an eye out as we move forward. So it really comes into this cloud networking piece to step up to the mark now and have a look at how those things are featured. NetScaler's always been one of the best products out there for multi-tenancy, and by that we mean if we've got additional applications and services rather than just one in the background, we need to be able to manage the SLAs around those things. Here I've got my apps and I've just made it very simple. They're red, green, yellow, and blue applications. And my end users expect the SLAs for each of those to be met. Now, obviously, if we've only got a small user count and we've got a one server in the background or a couple for HA, that's fine. But as more users access this content, we might find that a run on the red server application might impact the performance on the green server application because everything's being squeezed through this one NetScaler appliance, one application delivery controller. So what's required in those instances is a method of being able to isolate components within that NetScaler or within that application delivery controller, or better still, to be able to take multiple individual application delivery controllers and host them in one physical appliance. And that's the basic principle behind the NetScaler SDX. This isn't new. If you want to have a catch up on that, check it out on cloudDNA TV. There's a NetScaler SDX video that's available to watch on demand straight after this broadcast. The idea behind having fully isolated instances is probably the best possible sense, because then we can guarantee that we've got the available resources to deliver the red server, the green server, the yellow server, and so on. But what we're finding again now is as user counts grow and fluctuate, it's necessary to be able to add more instances into those stacks. Now, again, if you're not familiar with the SDX appliances, don't worry about it too much. But the principle is there's a finite amount of capacity on those devices. So where historically we've not been able to, we can now support clustering of NetScaler SDX devices. So this means that if we're in the position where we've got a reasonable amount of growth, but we don't want to overcommit with our spend immediately, then it's possible to add additional NetScaler SDX appliances, spin up additional resources, and cluster those in the traditional sense across multiple devices. This might not make a great deal of sense, but if you have a look at the TriScale piece on our blog, netscalertailor.com, then that will make a little bit more detail into that. It'll give you a little bit more detail into that. So in an ideal situation, NetScaler SDX is the best way of getting multi-tenancy into a single platform. It gives you completely isolated instances, and that's going to obviously give you complete control over what's happening with each of those applications. But to be brutally honest, it's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut for a lot of organizations. It's quite a heavyweight investment if your user counts are relatively small, but you still need to have some isolation on the back end there. And what we mean by that is that perhaps we need a new technology in there. And this is exactly where traffic domains come into. So Citrix NetScaler 10.1, this new feature, traffic domains, allows us to give network level isolation at the back-end infrastructure to be able to share the resource and the management on the actual NetScaler appliance, but be able to completely isolate the traffic moving out the back end so that we can have multiple use of IP addresses and so on. There's a lot to learn around this, and we're starting to see now how people are going to use it in the grand scheme of things. But it's quite a common question that I'm being asked at the moment. What's the difference between a traffic domain and what's the difference between an SDX appliance? So it seems sensible to throw this next slide up and just give you that information. If your needs are reasonably simple and you need some isolation towards the back end, traffic domains, either supported by the NetScaler NPX or the VPX, will be ideal. And they'll allow you to have that certain amount of isolation in there. If, however, you need to have that full memory and CPU allocation, or you need a different features or independence or configuration in there, in other words, that application delivery controller config isn't a one size fits all, then NetScaler SDX is probably the best way to go with that. Okay, so that's cloud networking kind of taken on a piece there. But I really wanted to also flick out into this auto scale piece. Now, this isn't brand new. This is something that's been bubbling away for a little while now. But auto scale is probably going to be the icing on the cake that really makes NetScaler stand out from some of those other application delivery controllers, which are kind of, well, they're anchored in rigid complexity, I suppose is one way of saying it. Let's take an instance here. We're back with our red application server, and we've got a user count represented by a tablet device there on the left. Now, what happens often is that we're in a position where we don't really know how many users are going to access our systems, and as a result of that, At any one time, we have to over provision. We have to put lots of application servers in there and wait for the requests to come in to make them busy. Now, that's fine, but obviously that leads to idle resource, and idle resource is never a good thing to have anywhere in your organization. So, what Autoscale does, and this is in conjunction with Cloud Platform, this effectively allows us to recognize when the load on that application delivery controller is seeing that this server is going to start to struggle. So, in other words, we're hitting a performance threshold. As we have more users accessing, we can effectively spin up more servers on the fly, bring an elastic capability into the server infrastructure in the back end there. And what Autoscale can also do is take that the complete opposite. So, in other words, as we start to see the users leaving our service, we can then start to take those application servers offline and migrate the users onto the live one. So you start to get this very flexible, elastic capability on your application server farm. We've seen this in the news industry quite frequently. You don't know when a news story is going to break. And so as a result of that, you may have 40, 50 servers sat there waiting for something to happen in the world. And as soon as that news story breaks, you get a massive influx of users coming in, and then you're actually using that capability. But clearly, having all of those servers provisioned just to do that job and sat there waiting for something to do is not a great methodology. Now, flip that round. If you're a hosting provider, perhaps you've got lots of different companies that you look after. You could then start to be in a position where you scale up these services as the requirement is there for your customer, but you give yourself a unique in the market, or at least for now, until everybody else catches up, that you work in a very, very efficient way to keep your costs down. So you can always guarantee that your users will get the service that they require, but you keep the overhead down in the background when the user counts are more modest and lower. It's not brand new, but it's something that we wanted to feature because there have been amendments in the background there to make this more relevant as we're moving forward. Okay, it's a quick whistle-stop tour around some of the key features on NetScaler 10.1, and I say we're not going to go into all 200 of them today, but if you are prepared and you have a print screen button or a screenshot capture if you're a Mac user, then have a quick go at that lot. So first and foremost, with 10.1, we've got new features around enterprise-ready clustering. We've got additional features around the traffic management enhancements as well. If you were on the NetScaler masterclass yesterday, the application layer control with AppQoE is really something quite interesting to have a look at. We may even feature that in a future essential guide. There's lots and lots in there, and clearly I'm not going to read through all of those now. Ready for another screen capture? Here you go. In data stream, for those of you familiar, this is the SQL enhancements and the SQL optimization, something that we've been after for a little while is the Kerberos support for SQL. Oh, that's here now. And for those organizations that are using SAML to go and authenticate in the cloud and so on, two-factor authentication is also now supported. Something else that's really relevant here, and you start to see this on this slide, the previous slide, and if you're ready for another screen capture, on this one as well, is this IPv6 transitioning. We're starting now realistically to see the intake on IPv6 really step up. IPv4 is long gone in many instances. Yes, there's a few addresses floating about, but this is 2013 and IPv6 is here and it's big and it's staying. So if you're in that position now where you're looking at moving over from one to the other, or you're looking at transitioning between the two, then simplifying that process with these networking enhancements, that could be something interesting as well. If you're using NetScaler for the app firewall at the top left of the screen, you'll see there's also automatic signature updates with IBM AppScan and White Hat and Trend Micro integration out the box. So again, we're looking at those methods of integrating with third-party vendors, and we're looking at the ability to extend the capabilities of NetScaler, which is currently the world's most advanced cloud network platform. So security, availability, the scalability and the efficiency, and more importantly, the performance in there, you can start to see why so many of the larger .coms have already been on NetScaler for some time. And if you'd like to understand more about how it could work in your own environments, then take a look at our website, which is clouddna.co. Have a look at my blog, netscalertaylor.com, or by all means, drop me an email, al@clouddna.co. It's always great to hear your feedback. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.